Hi, welcome back to Educator.com's AP Music Theory course. Today's lesson is part writing second inversion triads. So the objectives for this lesson are just to learn the common usages of second inversion or 6/4 chords. So we're going to look at passing 6/4s, neighboring 6/4s, and cadential 6/4s, and then also the thing called the arpeggiating 6/4. So as you probably noticed from the lesson objectives, 6/4 chords, they're not like the root position and first inversion chords that we've been connecting together in 4 parts. They only really happen in a few very limited instances and usages. So we will cover those usages and see that that's really the only way that we will use them. So let's look at passing second inversion chords. And first, we can, to look at these, we should look at this common bass line that they're employed in. So if we're in C major and we have a C moving to a D, moving to an E, which usually means that, of course, we have a 1 chord on one side, and then as we saw in the first inversion lesson, a 1/6 on the other side. So there's going to be some kind of chord here that is basically passing between this 1 and this 1/6, and originally we saw that it was a 7 diminished 6 chord, but now that we're using second inversion chords, this can also be a 5/6/4. 6/4, of course, being the notation for second inversion chords. So let's look at this progression with a 5/6/4. So if we start with G, C, E here, so you'll see that we have the D of the 5 chord, and then here is the G, and then the C moves down to a B, and this E moves down to a D because we always want to double the root, or the bass, excuse me. And now moving to this 1/6 chord, so we have a G stays on the G, and then the B moves up to a C, and now the D, we want to be careful of parallels because this D is moving to an E, so we'll move down to a C as well. So this voice leading for this progression is very common. So we have this G that stays throughout, and then the C that moves down a step to B, and then back up to C, and then this mi, re, do movement of the third. Okay, the second type of 6/4 chord is a neighboring chord, and the bass line for that looks like this. So we've got a 1 on one side and a 1 on the other side, and the bass line stays the same. So this, of course, C in C major for a 6/4 chord has to be a 4/6/4. And so what's happening here is the E moving up a step to an F, and the G moving up a step to an A, and keeping the C, and then moving right back down to where it was initially. So it's called a neighboring 6/4 because of this upper neighbor back down movement. So you can see in both of these cases, these 6/4s are sort of filling in around a more kind of main progression and just serving as a sort of decoration. So first the passing 6/4, which was connecting a 1 to a 1/6 or some similar sort of bass line. And now the neighboring 6/4, just letting us repeat the bass line and changing the harmony over it. And the third form of 6/4 happens at the cadence. So let's make a little progression that leads to a cadence here. So let's see, we can stay in C major and starting on a 1 chord, move to 4, and then the 6/4 bass line usually looks like this. And also I should introduce a bar line here because it's important to note that this cadential 6/4 always happens on a downbeat, on a strong beat. So we've got a 1 moving to a 4, and here is the 6/4, so it's going to be notated as a 1/6/4, but really it's just a upper neighbor again to the 5, and then back to 1. So let's see the upper voices for this progression. So C, E, G, and then moving to 4, so we know we want to keep the common tone here, and then move to F and A. And now we're moving to a 6/4, so we want to double the bass, so we've got C here, and then E here, and G here. And then this is going to move to a 5, so we can keep the G here, and these notes just each move down a step. And then of course this moving to a 1, I'm going to go ahead and keep the G, and then these notes go back to where they were. So really what's happening here is that we're introducing dissonance before we land on the 5 chord. So what happens is that this 1/6/4 is, it sounds like 5 in the bass, but it's got this double kind of upper neighbor motion before we can get to the leading tone and the D, and then move back to 1. So this is very common at cadences, and important things to note about it is that it's often approached by step from below. So 4 to 1/6/4 is very common, and also the bass line, instead of just repeating the G twice here, often moves down an octave or moves by an octave from the 6/4 to the 5. And of course, I mentioned earlier that the 6/4 should land on a strong beat. Okay, and then the final 6/4 usage, it's not really as functional as the other ones, but still can occur, is arpeggiating bass. So it's pretty simple. Really, all that's happening is we can move, if we're staying on the same harmony, we'll keep it with 1, moving to a 1/6, and then moving to a 1/6/4, and then maybe moving back to a 1/6, and then anything from there can happen. And of course, it's perfectly acceptable to just keep the same notes in the upper voices throughout, or they can move with the bass line. So just want to be careful of parallels. So let's see, we can move this G, the C can move down to G, and then this E can move down to C, and then this G can stay on G. And this gives us a nice spaced 1/6 chord at the end. Okay, for our first example, let's practice a bit with the passing 6/4. So let's say we're given a bass line to harmonize, maybe something like this. Stay in C major, so C up to G, and then E, D, C. So of course, first thing always to do is to look at the beginning and the end and fill in the 1. And now moving from 1 to a 5 here works because we're going to land on a 1 after the 5, so 1/6. And of course, here's our passing 6/4. Good idea to bracket it. So of course, this means that this is a 5/6/4, and we can fill in the upper voices now. C, E, G, and keep the common tone, B, D, G. And now we need this leading tone to go back to C, and then G here. And I'm going to double I'll just keep it here, E. And now, let's see, now we have the passing 6/4 coming, so we need to double, we can keep this G here and then double the D here. Actually, we can't double the D because the E is going down to D here, so we will move the C up to a D and then the E up to a G here. And then for the final one, we can keep this G. This moves down to, this moves up to E, and we'll double the G, keep that doubled. So there we go, not as orthodox, I guess, as moving from C up to E, but nonetheless, you can see the motion where the 5-6-4 passes between the 1-6 and the 1. Okay, for our second example, let's practice with the passing 6-4. So let's say we are given a baseline, let's be in A minor for now. So this sort of baseline, A, D, E, 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 A. So this is the pedal 6-4. So let's start with our 1 on either side. And then let's see here. So this is a D, so it can be just a simple 4 chord moving to 5. And of course, this is our repeated bass line here, so this will be our opportunity for our pedal, or what I called earlier the neighboring 6-4. So it's going to be a 5 to a 1-6-4 to a 5 and back to a 1. And notice that this is different from the cadential 6-4, even though the cadential 6-4 involved a 1-6-4 moving to a 5. But the usage here is different because we're beginning with a 5, and then the 1-6-4 is ornamenting that and then coming back to a 5. So let's do this voice leading. So C, E, A, and then we'll keep the common tone here and move these as close as possible. And now we want to avoid parallels, moving up by step, root position. So D goes down to B, F to E, and A to G sharp. So remember that in minor we need to raise the leading tone. Okay, and then this is a pretty simple motion. B to C, E stays on E, G sharp to A, and then right back here. And then, of course, we can use the same motion for the cadence because the bass is now going to 1, but the upper voices can do just what they did before. Okay, for example 3, we can look at a cadential 6-4. So let's stay in A minor just to contrast it with the pedal 6-4 example from before. So we can start on A and move through a 4 chord here, and then 2 E's and an A. And again, I'll draw a bar line just as a reminder for the strong metric accent on the 1-6-4. So we've got 1, of course this can be a 4 or a 2-6. In this case, let's keep it a 4. And then here's the 6-4, and here's the 5, and then back to 1. So again, same idea for voice leading. Keep the common tone and move these as close as possible. And then we want to double the bass on the 6-4 as always, so we'll keep the A here, and then C, E. And then for the 5 chord, we want to keep the common tone and move this down and this down, and don't forget the G sharp. And then for the cadence, of course, we can move this right back to where it was. So again, the important things to note on the cadential 6-4, and I'll bracket it, are approaching it from step from below, and then the strong accent metrically, and also possibly the octave jump in the bass. Okay, for the last example, let's do a arpeggiating 6/4 chord. And let's be in D major for this one. So we can draw the bass line. Maybe we can start with something different. And then move through an arpeggiating chord. So let's see how we can harmonize this in a way that makes sense. So of course, the beginning and the end are 1. And then we have this familiar motion that we saw before, the D down to the leading tone, back up to D. So we know that this is going to be a 5/6 to a 1. And now the rest of these notes are all parts of the D major triad. So here's a 1/6, and here is a 1/6/4, and then here moving back to a 1. And here we could make this a 1/6/4, but since it's the penultimate chord, we should make it a 5, just to give ourselves a cadence back to 1. And now let's do the upper voices. So A, D, F sharp, moving to A, E, A, so we don't want to double the leading tone here. And then moving back to A, D, F sharp. And now we can simply keep these voices held over throughout the 1 chord. And then be sure to move them again here for the 5, so A, C sharp, E, and then right back to 1. All right, thanks for watching Educator.com's AP Music Theory course.